I'll create a realistic 4-chapter story based on your synopsis about Daniel, a pastor struggling with morbid obesity who embarks on a transformative journey toward health. The story will be set in the USA, titled Daniel Was Morbidly Obese. Today he's medication-free, and written in English with approximately 1,100 words per chapter. Here's the complete story. Daniel was morbidly obese. Today he's medication-free. Chapter 1. Daniel Matthews stood behind the pulpit of Grace Community Church, his booming voice filling the sanctuary as he delivered his Sunday sermon. At 42, he commanded respect as the senior pastor of this growing congregation in suburban Ohio. His charisma was undeniable, eyes twinkling with passion as he spoke about spiritual discipline and living a life of purpose. "We are called to honor these bodies, these temples of the Holy Spirit," Daniel proclaimed, gripping the edges of the wooden podium that concealed most of his 387-pound frame. Sweat beaded on his forehead under the bright lights, not just from the fervor of his message, but from the sheer effort of standing for 40 minutes straight. As the worship team began the closing hymn, Daniel felt the familiar burning sensation of acid reflux creeping up his throat. With practiced discretion, he slipped a pill from his pocket and swallowed it dry, one of 17 medications he took daily to manage his deteriorating health. After the service, Daniel greeted churchgoers with handshakes and hugs, his genuine love for his congregation evident in every interaction. Elderly Mrs. Peterson pressed a container into his hands. "My special peach cobbler," she beamed. "I know it's your favorite." You're too kind," Daniel replied, already anticipating the moment he'd be alone with that cobbler. Food was his faithful companion, his consistent comfort in a world of constant demands. Back in his office, Daniel closed the door and eased his massive body into his reinforced chair, wincing at the shooting pain in his knees. The doctor's words from his last visit echoed in his mind. Severe sleep apnea, pre-diabetic, hypertension. If something doesn't change drastically, you won't see 50. He opened his desk drawer, revealing an arsenal of medication bottles, beta blockers for his heart, pills for his blood pressure, acid reflux, cholesterol, and pain management. The irony wasn't lost on him. How many sermons had he preached about freedom while he himself remained chained? His phone buzzed with a text from his wife, Rachel. "Don't forget Emily's basketball game at 5. Daniel sighed, remembering how he'd promised his 14-year-old daughter he wouldn't miss another game. Yet the thought of squeezing into those gymnasium bleachers, of the stares and whispers, made his chest tighten with anxiety. That evening, Daniel arrived at the high school gymnasium just as the game was starting. He scanned the packed bleachers, heart sinking at the narrow spaces between spectators. Rachel spotted him and waved, having saved him an end seat in the front row. Even this small act of consideration highlighted his condition. She knew he couldn't navigate the bleacher steps. As he made his way toward her, his breathing labored from the short walk from the parking lot, Daniel heard a child's voice pipe up. "Mommy, why is that man so fat?" The innocent question cut through the gymnasium chatter like a knife. Daniel pretended not to hear, but the hot flush of shame spread across his face as he carefully lowered himself onto the bleacher, which creaked ominously under his weight. During halftime, Daniel excused himself to use the restroom. In the empty hallway, he paused to catch his breath, leaning against the wall as pain radiated through his chest. Was it a heart attack or just anxiety? He couldn't tell anymore. He fumbled for his pill bottle, hands shaking as he swallowed another medication. In the harsh fluorescent light of the bathroom mirror, Daniel finally allowed himself to really look at his reflection, the man he'd become. His clerical collar seemed to emphasize rather than hide his multiple chins. His eyes, once so full of life, now appeared sunken in his swollen face. "Who are you to guide others?" the reflection seemed to ask. "You preach about overcoming temptation while secretly gorging yourself in your car before coming home. You speak of discipline while your own is non-existent." The bathroom door swung open as Mark Thompson, a new church member, entered. Surprise registered on his face at finding his pastor here, vulnerable and clearly struggling. "Pastor Daniel, are you okay?" Mark asked, genuine concern in his voice. Daniel straightened, automatically donning his pastoral mask. "Just a little winded. Emily's playing great tonight." Mark nodded, but his eyes held something Daniel rarely encountered, not judgment, but recognition. "I know we don't know each other well," Mark said quietly, "but before I joined Grace, I was where you are. 340 pounds, diabetes, the works. If you ever want to talk—" Daniel managed a polite nod, but inside, something shifted. In that moment of being truly seen, not as Pastor Daniel the spiritual leader, but as Daniel the struggling man, a seed was planted. That night, after Emily's team lost by 3 points, the family drove home in relative silence. At home, while Rachel and Emily discussed the game's highlights, Daniel retreated to his study, ostensibly to review his sermon notes. Instead, he found himself staring at family photos on his desk. Emily's birth, her baptism, family vacations when she was younger. In each progressive photo, his size increased while his participation in activities decreased. In the most recent family photo from Christmas, he sat in a chair while Rachel and Emily stood beside him, because standing for too long had become too painful. Daniel opened his laptop and typed, "Mark Thompson, Grace Community Church." His finger hovered over the search button, trembling slightly with the weight of what might come next. This wasn't just about losing weight anymore. It was about reconciling who he claimed to be with who he had become. As midnight approached, Daniel remained awake, an untouched piece of Mrs. Peterson's peach cobbler on his desk. For the first time in years, he was hungering for something more sustaining than food. Tomorrow, he decided, he would call Mark. Tomorrow would be different. It had to be. Chapter 2. The Tuesday morning men's prayer breakfast at Denny's had been a church tradition long before Daniel became pastor. Usually, Daniel relished these gatherings, not just for the spiritual fellowship, but for the socially acceptable opportunity to indulge in a grand slam breakfast, followed by a stack of pancakes for the table. Today, however, as he sat across from Mark Thompson, Daniel picked at his egg whites and dry wheat toast, a choice that had raised eyebrows among the regulars. "So, you were a fitness trainer before moving here?" Daniel asked Mark, still processing everything the newer church member had shared after their chance encounter at the basketball game. Mark nodded, sipping his black coffee. "For 15 years, but that was after my own transformation. Before that, I was a pharmaceutical sales rep who lived on fast food and stress." "Sound familiar?" Daniel managed a rueful smile. "Too familiar. I've tried everything. Weight Watchers, Atkins, keto, those meal delivery programs. I lose 20 pounds, then gain back 30. Because diets don't address why you eat," Mark said quietly. "What are you hungry for, Pastor? What void are you trying to fill?" The direct question caught Daniel off guard. As a pastor, he was used to being the one asking soul-searching questions, not answering them. "I don't know," he admitted, the honesty feeling foreign on his tongue. "The pressure, maybe. Everyone expects me to have all the answers, to be perfect. Food doesn't judge. Food doesn't expect anything back." Their conversation was interrupted as church elder Bill Johnson approached their table, plate piled high with bacon and pancakes. "Pastor, we missed you at the last deacon's potluck. Sister Margaret's fried chicken was divine intervention." Bill laughed, patting his own modest paunch. Daniel forced a smile, newly aware of how food-centered church fellowship had become. "Next time, Bill." After the breakfast dispersed, Mark handed Daniel a business card. "My home gym, tonight at 7. Just a conversation, no pressure. Bring comfortable clothes." That afternoon, Daniel sat in his office, staring at the card. His calendar showed a counseling session with the Andersons at 7, a couple whose marriage was struggling. It would be so easy to text Mark his regrets. Pastoral duties came first. Everyone understood that. But as Daniel reached for his phone, his drawer slid open, revealing his medication arsenal. 17 different pills to manage symptoms, while the root cause, his weight, remained unaddressed. With sudden resolve, he called the church secretary. "Janet, could you reschedule the Andersons? Something's come up that I need to address personally." At 6:58 that evening, Daniel sat in his SUV outside Mark's modest suburban home, gripping the steering wheel. He'd changed into the largest sweatpants and t-shirt he owned, clothing he typically only wore alone at home. The vulnerability of being seen in workout clothes made his heart race almost as much as any physical exertion. Mark's garage door was open, revealing not cars, but a simple home gym. Weights, a treadmill, resistance bands. Mark waved him in, dressed similarly in workout clothes, though his fit physique told a different story. "First things first," Mark said once they were inside. "This isn't about exercise yet. That comes later. Tonight, I want to understand your relationship with food. When did it become more than just sustenance?" For the next hour, sitting on a weight bench that creaked precariously, Daniel found himself sharing things he'd never voiced aloud. How food became comfort during his difficult childhood with alcoholic parents, how seminary stress led to late-night study sessions fueled by pizza and soda, how the pressures of ministry pushed him towards secret eating. "Food became my refuge," Daniel confessed. "The congregation sees me as their rock, but who do I lean on? I preach vulnerability, but practice isolation. The bigger I got, the more ashamed I felt, and the more I ate to cope with that shame." Mark listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When Daniel finally fell silent, emotionally spent, Mark spoke softly. "What if freedom from food addiction isn't just about willpower? What if it's about community, honesty, and finding healthier ways to handle stress and emotions?" "I don't know if I can be that vulnerable with my congregation," Daniel admitted. "They need me to be strong." "Maybe they need you to be real," Mark countered. "You don't have to announce anything dramatic. Just start making different choices, one day at a time, and let me help you." As they wrapped up, Mark handed Daniel a simple notebook. "For the next week, just record what you eat, when you eat it, and what you're feeling at the time. No judgment, just awareness. Can you do that?" Daniel nodded, gripping the notebook like a lifeline. The following Sunday, Daniel stood at the pulpit as usual, but something had shifted internally. His sermon on authenticity took on new meaning as he spoke about masks and pretenses. "Sometimes our greatest ministry comes not from our strengths, but from our struggles," he told the congregation. "We cannot guide others to places we refuse to go ourselves." After the service, instead of his usual retreat to the office with potluck leftovers, Daniel remained in the fellowship hall, drinking water instead of sweet tea, filling his plate with salad before the casseroles. Rachel caught his eye across the room, a question in her gaze. He hadn't told her about his meeting with Mark, not yet, but as their teenage daughter Emily approached with her own plate, noticeably missing her usual brownies and instead filled with colorful vegetables, Daniel realized his choices were already speaking volumes. That night, as he filled in his food journal, Daniel noted something unexpected. For the first time in years, he'd gone a full day without taking his acid reflux medication. It was a small victory, insignificant to anyone else. But as he closed the notebook, he felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest, not indigestion, but hope. Chapter 3. 3 months into what Daniel now called his reclamation journey, the physical changes were becoming noticeable. 47 pounds lost, 3 medications eliminated, 1 notch tighter on his belt. But the internal transformation ran deeper. Each morning at 5:30 a.m., rain or shine, Daniel met Mark at the local park. What began as painful 5-minute walks had gradually extended to 30 minutes of steady movement. Today, as autumn leaves crunched beneath their feet, Daniel realized he was breathing easily despite the brisk pace. "Remember your first day?" Mark asked, a knowing smile playing on his lips. "You wanted to quit after half a lap." Daniel chuckled. "I was convinced I was having a heart attack. Turns out it was just my body in shock from actual movement." Their morning ritual had expanded beyond just exercise. These walks had become Daniel's confessional space, where he could voice struggles without fear of judgment. Today's topic, the church potluck scheduled for that evening. "I'm dreading it," Daniel admitted. "Sister Margaret's already told me twice she's making her famous mac and cheese just for me. How do I navigate that without hurting feelings?" Mark considered this. What if food isn't really what they're offering? What if it's connection, appreciation, love? Can you receive the intention while making choices that serve your health? The question lingered as they completed their loop around the park. Daniel had learned that physical health rarely existed in isolation from spiritual and emotional well-being. Each area influenced the others in ways he was only beginning to understand. That evening, the church fellowship hall buzzed with activity. Long tables groaned under the weight of casseroles, fried chicken and homemade desserts, a Southern Baptist feast despite their Midwestern location. Daniel filled his plate strategically, small portions of lean proteins, vegetables, and yes, a tiny spoonful of Sister Margaret's mac and cheese. When she beamed at him from across the room, he returned her smile with genuine warmth. "Just a small portion tonight, Margaret," he explained when she approached with concern. "Doctor's orders. But it's delicious as always." It wasn't a lie. His doctor had been explicit at his last checkup. Continue making gradual changes or face dire consequences. His blood pressure had improved but remained elevated. His blood sugar levels were stabilizing but still concerning. The journey was far from over. As the evening progressed, Daniel noticed something unexpected. Without his usual food focus, the anticipation of eating, the consumption itself, the regret afterward, he was more present for his congregation. He heard about Jim's promotion, Sarah's struggle with her mother's dementia, the Thompson teenagers' college applications, real life happening all around him, connections he'd been missing while lost in his food fog. Rachel appeared at his side, slipping her hand into his. "You're different tonight," she observed quietly. "Good different?" he asked. "Present different," she replied, squeezing his hand. "Like you're actually here with us, instead of just going through the motions." Her words struck deeper than she knew. For years, Daniel had been physically present, but emotionally checked out. Not just at church functions, but at home. How many family dinners had he spent mentally planning his next secret snack? How many of Emily's stories had he missed while fantasizing about dessert? The following Wednesday evening, instead of his usual midweek sermon, Daniel made an unexpected announcement. "For the next 6 weeks, I'm starting a new Wednesday night group called Temples and Tabernacles," he told the congregation. "We'll be exploring what Scripture really says about caring for our physical bodies and how that connects to our spiritual lives." He hadn't planned this initiative. The idea had come to him during prayer that morning, a gentle nudging that wouldn't be silenced. To his surprise, 23 people signed up that very night. The first session revealed that Daniel wasn't alone in his struggles. Deacon Johnson confessed to stress eating during board meetings. Youth leader Melissa admitted her obsession with dieting had become its own form of idolatry. College student Jason described using food to cope with academic pressure. What if our relationship with food reflects our deeper spiritual condition? Daniel posed to the group. What if healing one helps heal the other? As October turned to November, Daniel's journey gained momentum. Morning walks with Mark extended to include light jogging intervals. The food journal evolved into a spiritual diary, recording not just meals, but prayers, insights, and victories. Sunday sermons became more authentic, drawing from Daniel's daily battles and breakthroughs. Not everyone embraced the changes. Board member Thomas Reynolds made his displeasure known after Daniel suggested replacing donuts at board meetings with fruit and nuts. "We've always had donuts," Thomas insisted. "What's next, Pastor? Kale smoothies instead of communion wine?" Daniel recognized the resistance for what it was, fear of change, discomfort with new patterns, the same forces he battled within himself daily. One Tuesday evening, while working late at his church office, Daniel faced an unexpected test. The stress of budget planning had triggered his old craving for comfort food. Before conscious thought intervened, he found himself in his car, pulling into the drive-thru of his former late-night haunt. "Welcome to Burger Boss. May I take your order?" The familiar voice crackled through the speaker. Daniel sat frozen, window down, the scent of fryer oil enveloping him like an old friend. His mouth watered with Pavlovian response. One meal wouldn't erase 3 months of progress. No one would know, except he would know. "Sir, can I take your order?" Daniel cleared his throat. "I'm sorry. I made a mistake." He put the car in reverse and pulled away, hands shaking slightly on the steering wheel. Instead of driving home, he found himself parking at the community track near the high school. The November night was cold, stars sharp overhead as he began walking slow laps, processing what had just happened. On his third lap, he spotted a familiar figure sitting in the bleachers. His daughter, Emily, still in her basketball practice clothes, head bent over what appeared to be homework. "Dad?" she called, spotting him. "What are you doing here?" Daniel climbed the bleacher steps, a task that would have left him winded months ago, and sat beside her. "Just needed to clear my head. Budget season at church." "What about you?" "Coach says I should work on my endurance if I want more playing time," she explained, gesturing to her math textbook. "Figured I might as well study between laps." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, before Emily spoke again. "Mum and I talk about it, you know, how different you are now. Not just smaller, but more here. Like you came back from somewhere far away." The simple observation from his teenage daughter, normally so absorbed in her own world, caught Daniel off guard. Had his absence been so obvious? Had his return been equally so? "I'm trying," he said simply. Emily nodded. "Me too." She stood gathering her books. "Race you to the next corner? Bet I still win." Daniel laughed and rose to his feet. "You're on." As they jogged side by side in the cool night air, Daniel felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the simple joy of moving through space with his own child, present in his body, present in the moment, fully alive. That night, for the first time in over a decade, Daniel didn't take a single medication before bed. Chapter 4. Spring came to Ohio with a riot of daffodils and dogwoods, nature's testimony to renewal and rebirth. For Daniel, the changing season marked 7 months of his reclamation journey, a pilgrimage that had transformed not just his body, but his ministry. Standing on the scale in his bathroom, Daniel watched the digital numbers settle at 281. 106 pounds lost, gravity's hold on him literally diminished. His doctor had eliminated 12 of his 17 medications, with plans to review the remaining 5 at his next appointment. But numbers told only part of the story. The real measure of change revealed itself in moments, climbing the bleachers at Emily's games without pausing for breath. Teaching his Temples and Tabernacles class, now expanded to include members from 3 neighboring churches. Leading worship without hiding behind the pulpit, his voice stronger without the weight compressing his diaphragm. This Sunday morning, however, brought a new challenge. The Regional Baptist Association had invited Daniel to share his testimony at their annual leadership conference, not as Pastor Matthews, the spiritual authority, but as Daniel, the man who found himself through losing himself. "Are you nervous?" Rachel asked, straightening his tie in the kitchen. His clothes were all new now, his former wardrobe donated to charity. Even his face seemed different. Cheekbones and jawline emerged from hiding, eyes brighter without the surrounding puffiness. "Terrified," Daniel admitted. "Preaching is one thing. This is vulnerability," Rachel finished for him. "The real kind, not the carefully curated version." She was right. For years he'd preached vulnerability while practicing concealment. Today would change that permanently. The conference center hummed with activity as hundreds of pastors, youth leaders, and church administrators gathered for the weekend event. Daniel slipped into the green room, reviewing his notes one last time. A knock at the door revealed Mark Thompson, now both his trainer and one of Grace Community's newest deacons. "Packed house," Mark reported. "Seems your story struck a nerve in the invitation materials." Daniel nodded, not entirely surprised. The statistics were sobering. Clergy members suffered from higher rates of obesity, hypertension, and depression than most professions. The shepherd rarely tended their own health while caring for the flock. "What if they're not ready to hear this?" Daniel voiced his deepest fear. "What if they see it as weakness rather than strength?" Mark considered this. "Maybe some will, but others might find permission to begin their own journeys. Isn't that worth the risk?" As the worship team concluded their final song, the conference director introduced Daniel to enthusiastic applause. Taking a deep breath, Daniel stepped onto the stage, approaching the podium without his customary notes. "My name is Daniel Matthews," he began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. 7 months ago, I was a 387-pound pastor on 17 different medications, literally dying while preaching about abundant life. The room fell silent, hundreds of eyes fixed on him. I stood before my congregation every Sunday preaching discipline, moderation, and stewardship, while secretly stopping for fast food on my way home from church. I counseled parishioners about finding freedom in Christ while remaining enslaved to compulsive eating and emotional food dependencies. Daniel paused, taking a sip of water. My journey toward health began not with a diet plan or exercise regimen, but with a moment of brutal honesty, the recognition that I had become a living contradiction. My physical reality undermined my spiritual message in ways I'd refused to acknowledge. And for the next 30 minutes, Daniel shared his story without sanitizing the struggles, the shame cycles, the secret eating, the spiritual disconnection, and the painful process of reconnection. He described the early morning walks that became runs, the food journal that became a spiritual diary, the gradual medication reductions, and most importantly, the community that made transformation possible. "What I've learned," Daniel continued, "is that our physical health and spiritual well-being are not separate categories, but deeply interconnected aspects of the same whole. The body and spirit inform each other, limit each other, and ultimately free each other." He shared specific strategies, how his church had reimagined fellowship events beyond food focus, how they'd started walking prayer groups and cooking classes featuring healthy versions of comfort foods, how the Temples and Tabernacles curriculum had expanded to include families struggling with food insecurity and body image issues. But the most important change, Daniel emphasized, was cultural. We've begun challenging the unspoken assumption that loving people means feeding them regardless of consequences. We're learning that breaking bread together can be meaningful without breaking our health in the process. As he concluded his testimony, Daniel noticed something he hadn't expected. Many in the audience were wiping away tears, nodding in recognition of their own hidden struggles. "I stand before you today on fewer medications, in a smaller body, but most importantly, as a more authentic version of myself. My congregation doesn't need a perfect pastor. They need a real one, someone who struggles, fails, begins again, and walks alongside them in the messy reality of human existence." The applause that followed felt different from the polite recognition that typically followed his sermons. This response carried something weightier: understanding, connection, perhaps even permission. Afterward, a line of pastors formed, each waiting to speak with Daniel briefly. Some shared their own health struggles. Others asked practical questions about implementing similar programs in their churches. A few simply thanked him for his honesty. As the day concluded, Daniel found himself sitting alone in the now empty auditorium, processing the impact of public vulnerability. His phone buzzed with a text from Emily. "Knocked it out of the park, Dad. We're waiting in the lobby whenever you're ready." Daniel smiled, pocketing his phone as he gathered his materials. 7 months ago, such a text from his teenage daughter would have been unimaginable. Not just her awareness of his professional events, but her willingness to claim him publicly. In the lobby, he found not just Rachel and Emily waiting, but a small group from Grace Community, Mark and his wife, Deacon Johnson and Sister Margaret, who proudly mentioned her new, healthier mac and cheese recipe, and several members of the Temples and Tabernacles group. "Surprise," Rachel said, embracing him. "We thought you might need some support today." Daniel looked at the faces surrounding him, his family both biological and spiritual, and recognized what he'd been missing during his years of isolation. Community wasn't just the context for his healing, it was the healing itself. As they walked together toward the parking lot, Daniel reflected on the journey that had brought him here. The path from morbid obesity to medication-free living hadn't been straight or simple. There had been plateaus, setbacks, and moments of doubt. The journey wasn't over. Maintaining health would be a lifelong commitment, not a finite goal. But something fundamental had shifted. Food no longer controlled him. Shame no longer defined him. The gap between his message and his reality had narrowed to a bridge rather than a chasm. Emily fell into step beside him, no longer the distant teenager but a young woman growing into her own strength. "So, Dad," she said with a grin, "ready for that 5K next month? Coach says the whole team is signing up." Daniel laughed, slinging an arm around her shoulders. "One day at a time, kiddo. But yeah, I think I am." As they reached their cars, the spring sunset painted the sky in hues of promise. Daniel paused, taking a deep breath of the fresh air, feeling the expansion in his lungs, the steadiness in his heart, the lightness in his step. Freedom, he realized, wasn't the absence of struggle, but the presence of purpose. His body, once a prison of pain and limitation, had become a vehicle for authentic ministry, not despite its imperfections, but because of the journey through them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new temptations, new opportunities for growth. But tonight, medication-free and clear-eyed, Daniel drove home, surrounded by those who had witnessed his transformation, not as spectators, but as participants in a story still unfolding. One day, one choice, one moment of honesty at a time.